Well, hello everybody, and welcome to the latest in Foyle's series of Fireside Chats. I'm really pleased to have with us today Amy Hopper, a digital marketing consultant, who's going to tell us a little bit about a very, very interesting development around Google Analytics. And I think this is going to be a really important conversation for Foyle members in particular to listen to and to understand. I've heard a little bit about it, but I'm really, really interested in finding out more about it this afternoon. So, Amy, let me kick off. What is Google Analytics for? And why should Foyle members care about it?
Okay, well, first of all, hello Foyle, hello Lawrence, hello Mark. Pleasure to be here today talking about Google, the world of Google Analytics. So Google Analytics, as I'm sure a lot of people know, it is the piece of free software provided by Google you place on your website, and it allows you to track and retain data about people using your website, how they use it, their movement, and the events that take place, the actions that they take on your website while they're there visiting. It's this what we're going to talk about today. GA4 is a new type of Google Analytics that's come in, and what the new program means and what that implication is for Foyle members.
So Amy, I mean, obviously having got the background to it, but what's the kind of timeline? Because if I understand it right, much of this is actually going to happen in 2023, but we need to be thinking about it now.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the moment, what we're using is well, some people call it GA3, but UA, Universal Analytics. It's what everyone's been using for long periods of time, for years now. And what's coming in is GA4. The main issue here is that this is going to be implemented from the 1st of July, 2023. And anyone listening to this may think, okay, well, I've got plenty of time. That's enormous, a year's time. The issue is that the way that GA4 operates and the way that UA currently operates are completely separate. Once GA4 is implemented on the 1st of July, you won't be able to use Universal Analytics. It's a forced usage of the new program. And once that is done, it will stop collecting data. So if you have Universal Analytics at the moment, that won't work anymore from the 1st of July. Also, you'll only be allowed 6 months after that date to gather any data that you currently have. So in terms of timeline, the reason we're trying to talk about this now and get people to implement GA4 now is so that you can start using that data, start seeing it, and build up a history, and build up a good amount of history before the forced implementation happens.
So just to be clear, if you don't do it, there's a risk you'll lose any year-on-year analytics that you might get between this year and the UA and next year and GA4.
Exactly. So what we try to get people to do is to make the change before the 1st of July this year, so that they have that year-on-year data, whereas now they won't have that. They'll sort of be comparing their old UA data with the GA4, but they won't have any GA4 data to compare it to. So do it now. That is the main tip for today.
So sorry, kind of slightly technical question on that then. So can people run both in parallel?
Yes, you can run both at the same time, yeah, and that's something that we because GA4 does work differently to Universal Analytics. So what we're saying is try and run them in parallel, which will not only allow you to see how the data is working, but give you a good idea of how GA4 works, as it is slightly different.
Okay, well that's really interesting, Amy. So I'm beginning to understand why this is going to be really critical for firms that put their products out through websites and promote their firms, their business through websites. They need to understand that data. But what other areas are what other types of business are going to really need to understand this and get to grips with it now, rather than waiting until July next year?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point you've made there. Obviously, e-commerce businesses is really important because they're selling everything online and you need to know exactly what everyone's doing online. Yeah. But this is something that is important for everyone across the board. So the main reason Universal Analytics is so different to GA4, the fourth version of Analytics, is purely because GA4 is much more mobile-led. We're a much more mobile-led world now. UA is just about the website, whereas GA4 is about website, app. It's much more, and it's also much more about actions that people take. rather than just looking at someone's session data, what they do within 30 minutes. It's about what are the actions they're actually taking on your website. What are they actually doing? There's also a lot of privacy issues that have come into play with Universal Analytics, which have been mitigated within GA4. So this is important for e-commerce businesses. It's really important for people that use any kind of digital ad, if they want to track properly and they want to see what people are actually doing, what ads are actually working, to make sure they're not throwing their money down the drain. Any business that's selling data products or wants to sell data products and they're doing so through their website. Anyone who just uses a website and wants to see what their customers are actually doing. Universal Analytics, as I've just previously mentioned, it works by analyzing what we call session data. So it's what someone does on your website within the 30 minutes that they're on it. Whereas GA4, we're looking at event data. What are the actions that people are actually taking? It's much more specific. It's much more about what people, it's much more about what people are actually doing, rather than, oh, they came onto your website, they looked at this page, they looked at that page. So from that sense, anyone who doesn't implement it is not ahead of the game. And when it comes to the 1st of July next year, they're going to lose their analytics altogether. And honestly, you sort of think, well, if I can't analyze what people are doing on my website, what's the point of having a website at all?
So Amy, obviously more from a foil specific point of view, they navigate the insurance industry, defending the causes of the people working within it. So you'd mentioned data privacy, and just very light touch referenced it. I think of all of the GA4 implications, and you very specifically said about some gaps analysis with Universal Analytics. So can you kind of dig a little deeper into the data privacy issues that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've looked in specifically for this for you guys. So we're actually finding that GA or UA could actually be in breach of GDPR. So there's been a lot of articles out there, a lot of people suggesting that because with Universal Analytics, and they don't actually mask the IP, they don't mask the IP of the computer, it could be that someone could combine that with third-party cookie data, which actually leads to the identification of the person, which is like quite a scary thought that could actually be happening. Whereas with GA4, the IP address actually is masked by default, so that doesn't happen straight away. You've got that extra level of privacy. Also, with the implementation of, so you've got GDPR in the UK, you've got the CCPA in the US. There have been issues with Universal Analytics and the location of servers. So the location of where your data is actually held. It could be that your data is sent across to California. And using that third-party cookie we spoke of before, the fact that your IP is enabled, there has been the suggestion that your data could be accessed by US federal government. Whereas with GA4, you can actually select where your data is stored. So you can select that it's stored within a server within the EU. So straight away, you've got the GDPR, you're protected by that, and anyone's data on your website, particularly for large firms within Foil, where they're dealing with huge number of data and huge lines of data, you actually now have the ability to select that and say, oh, I want an EU server, and you know that you're protected within that privacy, and you know you're not going to have a lawsuit on your desk the next day because of a data breach potentially in another country.
So I mean, really, really interesting. It struck me as you were talking about that this is going to mean quite a material change for things like cookie policies, site terms, conditions, privacy statements on websites. So maybe a couple of words about that, but also then thinking about, hopefully the people listening are getting a fair idea. There's a big sea change for them. So just a little few words about learning, training, any kind of resources that, if they want to go kind of look some of this stuff up now, which would be good. Yeah, so, yeah. But cookies and terms and conditions first off, if I may.
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose the main thing to know about GA4, as we've just touched on, is that this is privacy-led tracking. We've already sort of explored the fact that currently Universal Analytics could be in breach of current privacy law. That's kind of why GA4 is being brought in my personal opinion. And you're also, in implementing this, you are securing your website future and your analytics for a future where cookies don't exist, for cookieless tracking. And I did a TED talk about this a few years ago about the ad blocker future and what ads would be like without ad blockers. And so this is securing your website future, securing the ability to be able to still track while cookies on and third-party cookie data isn't being used. In terms of training, there's actually loads out there. So I know it always seems really quite scary when something changes, particularly such a big change like this. But there are blogs, there are multiple articles. Google offer their own free training on universe analytics, how to use it and how to make the most out of it. And that's something as well that sort of analytics is such a fantastic, like just brilliant tool for people to be able to use their website and use it properly and see what people are doing. So to sort of implement and not do anything with it, it has just so many other features available just in the free version alone.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Very good analysis. Thank you, Amy. When we were doing our sort of planning conversations for this podcast, you mentioned as well as GA4, you talked about GA360. Could you just tell us a little bit what that is exactly?
Oh, okay. So GA360 is the paid version of Google Analytics. So yeah, Google Analytics, they very much got on the paid bandwagon. But when I say paid, I don't mean, oh, that's a tenner a month. We're talking minimum $150,000 a year for GA360. So okay, so these are the main changes. So for the majority of people, the majority of businesses, GA4 is going to be absolutely brilliant. It's going to do everything that they need it to do. It's going to provide great analytic data and cover all of the privacy issues that have cropped up as well. GA360s is a little bit different. You get you can't set it up yourself. You have to contact a Google rep to do it, and then you get that Google rep as your main account manager. You get 24/7 helpline assistance. You get a team behind you that are there to help you with any of your analytical issues. And you think, for $150,000 a year, I hope so. I hope I get at least a branded mug as well for that cost. The main difference is the amount of data that you can capture. So we're currently with Universal Analytics, you're talking around about 10 million hits per month that will cover. But so the majority of websites, that's enough. If you do have a huge website, a huge amount of data, a huge amount of followers, the lower price plan of GA360, you can do 500 million hits a month on your website. It will cover, yeah, so we're talking huge numbers here. It has here is a 20 billion limit. So if you have a website that will do 20 billion a month, then good on you. Also, it's about the amount of data you can export. So with Universal Analytics, you can export 50,000 rows of data, whereas with GA4, it's 3 million. So again, it's a much bigger data sample, much ability to be able to analyze that data. You get your dedicated account manager, you get advanced modeling, advanced analytics, just basically greater data capture and greater sampling limits. It also means that if you're using things like Salesforce, you can integrate that in seamlessly and perfectly with Google 360. But it's not something that anyone would just sign up to willy-nilly.
But probably if you're Amazon, it's going to be a attraction to someone of that scale.
Exactly.
Probably not one of our foil clients.
I was going to say, I will have to check the number of hits we get on the foil website, but I'm not quite sure we're in that league just yet.
Not the 20 billion, no. So yeah, it is for the big, really, really big boys, but also what you then can do at Google 360 is quite special and quite fantastic. But again, not really worth it unless you're using just a huge amount of data that you couldn't possibly even begin to assimilate as an individual.
But I think I'm right in saying, Amy, this is the first time Google have had any kind of paid model on analytics. So is there a potential fear you might get the trickle down effect and the sell up effect, freemium to premium at the bottom end of it?
Yeah, I mean that's always the thought, isn't it? I remember when I was talking about this a few years ago about having everyone in the future where everyone used ad blockers. And I thought, okay, well, what will that mean? And I said, well, people would have to pay. And then you started things coming through like YouTube Red and the paid for accounts, and suddenly a lot of Google products, you've got the free versions with bits taken away and then added to paid plans. So yeah, I suppose there's always that fear. I think it'd be a very silly move to implement that, purely because they make so much money from ad revenue. You've got Google Ads, display, mobile, YouTube, and so many people that use those ad platforms are using analytics in order to, well, do what it says on the tin, analyze whether those ads are working. If they don't have a free plan in order to analyze whether the Google ads are working, they're not going to spend money on Google Ads. So
yes,
it's one of those things where I think it's actually worth them giving that free product, because they're essentially using it to prove that their own marketing platform works.
Mm-hmm. So I guess one final and the classic question, Amy, if you were going to give 3 tips, or more than 3, less than 3, whatever tips you think would be useful for the folks listening to this, what would they be?
Do it now. I suppose that's the main thing. Is the top tip number 1 is implement now, so that you have that year-on-year data, so that you can see your universal analytics running alongside GA4, and you can compare and contrast, and give you an idea of how GA4 works. Educate yourself and don't wait until the last minute. I'd say, again, learn, make the most of it. Use the Google free resources, invest in training. I say invest time, not money. It's all free and it's all there online. Really make the most of this new fantastic tool that you can implement on your website and use to push your business. And I would also say the last tip is, if you are worried about data and if you are worried about your privacy, make sure that you pick to have your data on a EU-based server that's based within the EU. You can also, I believe you can also pick a low carbon based server as well. I think you have that option. Okay. So if there's any businesses out there that care very much about the environment, they're carbon neutral, you can also do that as well.
Okay, that's fantastic. Well, look, thank you ever so much for that, Amy, and thank you also to you, Mark, for your contributions and for helping to put this together. It's been a really, really fascinating conversation, and I think it's an incredibly important development. I'm surprised that it's not higher up people's agendas, but hopefully this sort of information and this broadcast will help to get people to realise what the opportunities are for this. So if you'd like to find out more about this, you can go to the Google Training Centre, or you can contact Amy, whose details will be up at the end of this film. So thanks very much both once again, and see everybody again soon.